The wonders that man did carve out of stone and wove out of music, then called them his own, did last a brief hour, as in Greece and in Rome. It was grace at last that did free us, when our soul sought love alone. The wonders that man did carve out of stone and wove out of music, then called them his own, did last a brief hour, as in Greece and in Rome. It was grace at last that did free us, when our souls sought love alone.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome again to Sunday Service, and welcome to those joining online. I'm reading from Rays of the One Light. These are weekly commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriya-yoga, based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This week's topic: who are true Christians? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. Jesus Christ said in the Gospel of St. John, "All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them." Many Christians, not surprisingly, quote this saying in condemnation of other spiritual teachers, not only the Old Testament prophets, but also Buddha, Krishna, and others who lived before Jesus, as well as, by inference, of any who came after him. Yet Jesus himself said in Matthew's, in the chapter in St. Matthew, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Nowhere do we find Jesus condemning or even gently criticizing other spiritual masters. His criticisms were reserved for worldly attitudes and for those hypocritical Pharisees who had allowed religion to become, for them, a pretense. Paramhansa Yogananda explained that the expression, "all that ever came before me," referred to those spiritual teachers who placed their egos and their self-importance ahead of the Christ consciousness, in the sense of drawing people's devotion to themselves and not offering it where alone it truly belongs, to God. Yogananda himself was very firm in this regard. For example, he never spoke of anyone as his disciple. Instead, he always insisted, they are God's disciple. God is the guru, not I. Ego is a way station on the soul's journey toward enlightenment. The soul is first trapped in lower bodily forms. Slowly it evolves to the human level, at which point self-consciousness appears. Only in human form can self-consciousness transcend material form altogether, including the lower identity of ego consciousness, and discover the true divine self within. Self-consciousness manifested as ego is an incentive to deliberate self-development. Later in this process of development, however, the ego becomes an obstruction. Inevitably, new spiritual aspirants do not emerge effortlessly from the vortex of ego consciousness. Desire must be offered up resolutely and ever more wholeheartedly on the altar of infinity. It is a gradual process, and even among those who seek to help, and few even among those who seek to help others, are free of ego. If, however, their motive in teaching is not to serve, but to be served, They deserve a severe reprimand as Jesus gave them, for their direction of development is no longer upward, but downward. In the name of giving up desires, they are creating new ones. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, desire obscures even the wisdom of the wise. Their relentless foe it is, a flame never quenched. Intellect, mind, and senses, these combined are referred to as the seat of desire. Desire through them deludes and eclipses the discrimination of the embodied soul. O Arjuna, discipline your senses, and having done so, work to destroy desire, annihilator of wisdom and of self-realization. Give God the credit for everything you do. See him as the true doer. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. We have a new pulpit. Not quite sure about this. Well, this morning's topic reminds me of a joke. There are two monks walking along. One is looking pretty disgruntled, and the other one is saying to him, "But I am holier than thou." He's not buying it. The delusion of ego is the biggest barrier that we have to overcome. We go through millions of lifetimes, and we have sort of a group mind. You can think of a herd of horses. They have sort of one soul in a way. You've seen flocks of birds that can fly and turn all at once. That's sort of that group consciousness that animals have. But we have evolved to the place where it's just us. We have to learn how to put out energy, how to rely on God, and how to evolve. We really have the deck stacked against us in many ways. There's hormones, there's desires, all sorts of things that keep us bound materially. What we have to do is resolutely and ever more wholeheartedly offer ourselves on the altar of infinity. And this is not an easy thing. It takes a long time to finally decide, I really don't want anything else. I really just want God. And that comes to us through suffering. That's the path. You know, it's not fun, and I'm going to talk to God about it when I finally see him. But it's crime and punishment all the way. I remember one time I had this very bizarre experience. And I don't remember where it took place, but it was in a large city with big skyscrapers and a very wide sidewalk, you know, just really kind of dark and gray. Swami was in the passenger seat. Someone was driving, I don't remember who. And I was sitting behind Swami so that we were both looking out the same window at the sidewalk and all the buildings and all the people walking on the sidewalk. And we were just all very quiet, and probably taking Swami to at a lecture or something. And I've been in a lot of cities and I've seen a lot of people, but this was different. This was like a surreal quality to it. And as I looked at the people, I saw pain in all its manifestations: hatred, anger, fear. Everyone, it was like looking at a scene in hell. And finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. And I said, Swami, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Because we were both looking out the same window. And he said, yes. These people have been born to suffer. We suffer because we make wrong choices. We bet on the wrong thing. We bet on the wrong horse. There's only one horse. There's only one thing in life to bet on, to give your heart to put all your energy into. And that is the spiritual path. Nothing else will fill that void in our hearts. Nothing else that is sure. I remember the very first night I spent at Ananda Village. This was 1975, long time ago. It was very rustic, shall we say. And I picked a giant oak tree as my home, and I spread my little mat and sleeping bag out under this huge tree. And in the middle of the night, I woke up because deep underneath me, there was rumbling going on. There's a little miniature earthquake right under me. And I thought, oh, the earth isn't so solid after all. We put our faith in the earth being solid under our feet, but it can get flooded, can get earthquakes, can be burned. Nothing is secure. Nothing lasts. I don't know if you've ever explored this, but the sun will eventually burn out. That happens to suns. We won't be around to see it, probably, but because it's a few billion years away. But not even this planet is forever. Eventually, the distance between the moon and the earth will get longer and longer. The sun will go away. It'll just be a little rock in space. We have this moment to evolve. We need to take that and move with it and not think we have all the time in the world. Of course, in one sense we do. We can wait forever. We can play in the world with desires and emotions. There's just no end to the spectrum that we can explore. But do we want to? Let's get out of this. As many of you know, I fell 3 weeks ago, and I'm just now starting to regain what I had before. I thought my back was doing pretty well before that fall. But I remember not being able to sleep very well these past couple of weeks. And at one point in the middle of the night, I just felt this deep longing. It's like it went through all my chakras. Lord, let me out of here. We don't want that suffering. And everything else leads back to it if we focus on the material. What we need to be is a true Christian. And what does that mean? I love the words in the Bible where Jesus is reprimanding some people. And he's saying, Why do you say, Lord, Lord, and you don't do the things I tell you to do? We hear these things, we study them, we read them, but we forget. We need to do the things that Jesus taught. We need to give him our hearts. And we need to purify our minds and our hearts so that we're always thinking of him. And this is not easy to do. We tried playing that chant, which is a new one for us. We've never played that before. Because it says the words of Jesus, thy will, not mine. How often do we try to make our desires into God's will? Oh, God must want this. I'm sure God wants it to be this way, but that's the thing. We know the teachings. We know to step back from that thought. And in all humility, let all of our desires go and instead just think, Lord, what do you want? What really is trying to happen? I remember Swami saying, don't refer everything that happens back to yourself. Don't think everything applies to you. You're just not that important. Let God's will be done. And you concentrate, we all concentrate on doing what's right. And I know I say this quite often, but I'll say it again. We need to study and know the Bible, know the teachings of yoga. You know, this reading also talks about false prophets, teachers. And somewhere in the Bible, Jesus says, they come in sheep's clothing, but they're really ravening wolves. If you're looking for a spiritual path, don't look for flash and dazzle. Look for a tradition that has survived for thousands of years. Ancient wisdom that it's been tried and true for many devotees for millennia. Go with that. That's what I felt when I came on this path, because Yogananda took the vast teachings of India and distilled them down into scientific principles that we can study in the laboratory of our own meditation room. And I was thinking, you know, like Patanjali laid out the Eightfold Path by taking all the ancient wisdom from his time, and he lived centuries ago, and he distilled it down into that Eightfold Path. And Yogananda did the same thing. He took all of the teachings and made it a distillation of the truth. So put your energy into that. Study. And then I remember that beautiful story of St. Francis, who had given up his rich lifestyle. He'd renounced his beautiful, rich clothing, and he was just wearing a tattered coat that a peasant had exchanged with him for his nice clothes. And he was walking, no home, no food, nothing, no possessions, except he had his Bible. And a beggar woman came up to him frantic, and she said, "Give me something that I can sell so I can feed my children. I have nothing, and my children are starving." And Francis had nothing. accept his Bible. So reluctantly, he said, "Here, take this, sell it, and feed your family." And as he was walking away, he was praying, "Oh, Lord, I've given away your word." But then Jesus called out to him and said, "Don't worry, Francis. I've written my word on your heart." And if we have that, if we have God writing his word on our hearts, we'll never go wrong. No matter what happens, we will be led to the right thing. I'm reminded of Saint Joan of Arc. Let's see if I can get this right. You might have to help me. But she did these amazing things. You know, she was the only woman to head an army. She was only 17 when she did it. She just thing after thing. She's just amazing, amazing. And there was a lot of jealousy and a lot of hatred directed towards her. And eventually she was captured and questioned. They did all sorts of terrible things to her. And finally she was burned at the stake. But the part I'm remembering is they asked her, "Are you in a state of grace?" And in this question, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you're not, because
You can't say you're in a state of grace or you're in trouble, because that's blasphemy.
that's blasphemy. So what she said was, "I pray that I am in a state of grace. And if I'm not in a state of grace, I pray that God will help me to become that." She was unschooled. She had only God to rely on. And she came up with the perfect answer that confounded all of her enemies. So if you have God's word written on your heart, you will be safe. God will protect you.
This chant that we sang, and it was priceless, because "Thy will, not mine, Lord." At a certain point, my will wasn't the same as her will, because I started playing the wrong line. and the right line came along, and we finally got back in sync again. But it's like that in this world, that, you know, we're going along and we think, but I know exactly what I'm supposed to be singing or doing or thinking or whatever. And life is saying, excuse me, but there's another line in there before that. We have to get ourselves flexible enough to understand, to be able to relate what is trying to happen. That's a little phrase that came through Swami. In any situation, ask, what is trying to happen here? What is the need of the situation? And it's a beautiful, the other chant that we chanted, "Desire, my great enemy," which touches on this topic of sort of doing battle with desire, is fascinating, because the very natural question is asked, what will be my fate, Lord? Tell me. And he doesn't say, oh, your fate is going to be rich and powerful and glorious, and it's all going to be great, and it's just no problem. Then he doesn't say, no, you're hosed, you're just in big trouble, you're out of luck. He says, pranayam be thy religion. He's essentially saying, get busy. Pranayam will give thee salvation. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. Now, we have good news and we have bad news. The good news is that every desire that we've ever had must be fulfilled. Which, if you think about it, everything you've ever wanted, sooner or later it has to come to you. Okay, well, that sounds like that's pretty good. And the bad news is, every desire that you've ever had has to be fulfilled. And that could take a really long time, because sometimes we have really stupid desires that are going to lead us into all kinds of trouble and mischief and disaster. And so where we have to go with that is a little bit later in the chant. What does it say? Control the little pranayam. Become all-pervading pranayam. You won't have to fear anything anymore. And I don't know about you, but I kind of think living without fear is not a bad idea. In fact, we're going to sing a song called I Live Without Fear in a few moments that Swamiji wrote. If you think of all the entanglements that desire can bring, desire, my great enemy, with his soldiers surrounded me, is giving me lots of trouble. And this is like a heartfelt call of the devotee. Lord, I am in trouble. I am surrounded. I got a whole army facing me. And he says, that enemy I will deceive. He doesn't say I will defeat. He says I will deceive, remaining in the castle of peace, night and day in thy joy. There is, for those who were here on Friday night, Ram and Chandra gave a lovely concert and program shaped by Yogananda. It was very touching, and there were some stories and some little vignettes and some slides, some pictures of Yogananda and other disciples of his that I had never seen before. It was quite lovely. But I'd like to tell a little bit about one of those. There was a disciple of Yogananda. I never had the chance to meet him. I worked out the math, and I realized that I think I rode my bicycle near his ashram in Milwaukee once when I was in high school. I was on my way up to Milwaukee, riding from the Chicago area. It was about 100 miles. And I think I rode right near his ashram. It would have been great because he was still in the body, but only just for a little while longer, I think, at that point. Anyway, his name was Dr. George Gaye, Gaye, Dr. George. And the doctor part is an interesting little piece of the story, because he was not a doctor. But in 1938, he had spent some years, he met Yogananda in 1924, and he was a close disciple, although he lived in the Midwest, and he would have to make trips to California to see Yogananda, or occasionally Yogananda was in the Midwest and they could see each other. But he received a letter from Yogananda in 1938 in which Yogananda said, "You are a master of yoga, and you should be spoken to with a title of respect. You could choose doctor or you could choose master." He chose doctor. He didn't like the master. That was a little too steep of a climb. But there was an amazing story that Ram shared, which I read a little further. They were together in Encinitas, and Yogananda and Dr. George, and they had chanted, and they were pretty much in ecstasy at this point, both of them. And Yogananda they were down along the water, down below the ashram in Encinitas. And Yogananda walked out onto the water, and he called to Dr. George and said, "Come, I want you to walk on the water too." And Dr. George told people that he didn't go because he was afraid. And one student of his heard this story, and he knew. He didn't challenge him in the moment, but he came up to him afterwards and he said, You weren't afraid." He said, "No, I wasn't." He did walk out on the water with Master. He just didn't want to tell anybody because Yogananda had given him instruction, very stern instruction. He said, "Never let them know who you are. Never let them see who you are." Meaning, that he had fallen in other lifetimes because he was sort of proud of the miracles that happened through him. And in this lifetime, he had to be more circumspect with that. He was the kind of guy, though, apparently, who could not prevent miracles from happening. I'm kind of reminded of St. Joseph of Cupertino, who was housed in the Basilica of St. Francis for a number of times. I could say he was imprisoned in the Basilica of St. Francis because he had this inconvenient habit of levitating when he was doing the Mass. And people, of course, got really excited about that. I mean, it's kind of cool, seeing this saint go levitating up to the ceiling. In fact, there was a story of a Catholic who, a Lutheran who wanted to expose this charlatan, came down to see, and it is said that Joseph grabbed this fellow by the hand, and they both went up to the ceiling. And he went up a Lutheran and came down a Catholic. And anyway, but miracles, abounded around him. But he always kind of kept his distance. And George had this interesting way about him. He dressed like a hobo. His clothing was all shabby and crazy. His hair was cut crooked. It is like he was challenging people to recognize behind the outward appearance that there was something deep and real. And he touched people's hearts. He had a mission there in the Milwaukee area, and also a little, you could sort of call it an ashram, a kind of little community out in the country further in Wisconsin. And he took in homeless people. His property was condemned by the city starting in 1934. 40 years it was under condemned status. They were trying to bulldoze it. They were trying to get rid of all this ramshackle construction that he had done. They never could. He finally gave it to SRF and they sold it, and it turned into a big development there. But he felt Master's call to him to be who he was and yet remain a little bit hidden. And in a sense, that's what all of us are called to do. Not necessarily the hidden part, but just to say, I love, there's this line. This is the week in the year where Swami gives the absolute understatement of all understatements. Inevitably, let's see if I can quote it. Inevitably, the seeker, no, that's the wrong part.
Oh, it takes a while.
Inevitably, the spiritual seeker does not emerge effortlessly from the ego. I'm paraphrasing, but quote it exactly. Inevitably, new spiritual aspirants do not emerge effortlessly from the vortex of ego consciousness. Yeah. Yep, get that. Why? Ego is a help in the beginning because ego tells us, oh, that's my hand that got burned on the stove, or that's my skin that got sunburned in the sun, which used to happen to me a lot when I was a kid. It's like we learn to take responsibility. Oh, this is me. I need to deal with this. I need to fix this, figure this out, not do this, whatever. But then comes a certain point, and it's like the ego is in the way. The ego keeps kind of grabbing everything and saying, no, that's mine. That deep meditation, oh, ho, 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 I'm pretty hot stuff. That's mine. I'm grabbing onto that. And that's when the ego is no longer a help. That's where we're starting to have to do battle with it. And we can't defeat it entirely, but we can immobilize it. We can sort of make it no longer a factor. And then we actually learn, because ego is just soul consciousness tied to the body. Soul consciousness identifying with the body. Consciousness is there. Consciousness can never be destroyed. But the ego is just saying, no, but I'm this thing, I'm this thing. Well, no, we're not. We are light. When we do the fire ceremony, we are affirming, I am that light. Let me live that reality. And once we can, then we're no longer limited by this. We can dream the dream that has to flow through our lives and let it be whatever it needs to be. And I honor the example that Dr. George gave of just being unashamedly himself. He was someone who had to just play this very odd role. Well, all of us, in a sense, play a very odd role. It's whatever God gives us to do, wherever we are. My mother gave me a beautiful little slogan attached to some artwork. Bloom where you are planted. And in a way, that's the assignment for all of us. Wherever God has planted us, bloom and flourish in that place in such a way that others can see God's grace is moving through, and that none of it sticks. None of it sticks to us. Let it just flow out in blessing to others.
No green summer fade and winter draw near. My Lord, in your presence I live without fear. Through tempests, through snows, through turbulent tide, the touch of your hand is my strength and my guide. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. The dancers will pass, the singing must end. I welcome the darkness with you for my